There are two sides to every story, and if you listen to the FAF conference from 2019, you would have heard my husband Michael give his testimony. Today you'll hear the other side of the story. My prayer is that maybe you'll find hope and become familiar with the following phrase that my husband often said to me during this journey, and understand that it's not about you. My name is Laurie Werk, and I left Adventism about 6 years ago now. Well, my family wasn't Adventist when I was born. My father's family was, and so Adventism was part of my life for as long as I can remember. Some of my earliest memories were of a little girl in a lilac dress sitting in Sabbath school, or sitting in church watching my brother as he was dedicated to the Lord, and sitting at the back pew with my cousins on the left-hand side of the church, looking back and seeing my grandfather sitting in the deacon's room. My grandfather died when I was 6 years old, and this event had a big impact on my father. The question about what happens when you die weighed heavily on him. Interestingly enough, a flyer came to our house from a local church about a crusade that was going to be held, and one of the topics was, what happens when you die? My parents attended the crusade, and they were baptized. We then began attending that church regularly and became involved in the activities. I made some amazing friendships that have continued to this day, but there were a lot of things that changed that as a young child I didn't really understand. We never gave up meat, but all of a sudden we couldn't drink soda. There was no more Coca-Cola. I remember my father dumped his beer that he used to brew down the sink, and on Saturday afternoon when the kids would come to play, we weren't allowed to go out. But the most important thing to me at that time, we couldn't watch cartoons anymore before we went to church on Sabbath morning. Fast forward, I did go to public school for most of my education, with the exception of 2 years of middle school. I did go to the Adventist school, which I loved because I could be with my closest friends every day. But when I wasn't eligible to take some classes that I wanted to because there was limited space, I decided to leave and go back to public school. After that, I did attend university, and I went to graduate school. My graduate school was an Adventist university in Canada because I wanted to, continue my education, and I hoped to meet and marry an Adventist man. It was very important growing up. We often heard, that you had to be equally yoked, and I didn't want to be with someone who didn't believe as I did. Interestingly enough, when I went to the university, I met my husband that very first weekend that I arrived, and we dated briefly, but didn't begin a serious relationship until almost 2 years later. He began teaching in Canada, and I moved to Loma Linda, California, to pursue my career in marriage and family therapy since I had family there. And long story short, he moved to California, and we got married in Yucaipa and settled in Riverside, and we began our careers. Michael taught high school, and I became a school psychologist. We bought a house, and we were blessed with 3 amazing children. Before we had children, though, we decided that we really wanted to start looking for a church where we could raise our family. And we settled on one that was about 15 minutes from our home. I wanted one that was small and more intimate, like the country church that my husband had attended and grown up in, and one that also had a strong children's program. The church we found wasn't small, but it did have a good children's program, and so we settled on that one. And once we had our children, we became more and more involved in the children's programs and the things that were going on in our church. I believed personally that this was the best way to be engaged and to keep the kids engaged as they grew up, because that's what had worked for me when I was growing up, especially when I saw some of my friends or other people my age leaving. So I played the piano, I taught at various levels, I assisted with Pathfinders. If there was a need and they asked me to help, I very rarely would say no. I saw people on Saturday, but that was it. No calls, no texts during the week unless they wanted me to do something or participate in some activity. Although I knew a lot of people, I never really felt as if I had any good friends, and I missed those close friends of my childhood that were far away. I saw people on Saturday, and that was it. No calls, no texts during the week unless they wanted me to do something. I wanted to attend the women's Bible study, but that was out because it was during the day and I was working. God knew, though, that I needed someone, and at a baby shower, I started talking to one of the ladies who would become one of my best friends today. She's an amazing woman who listened and helped me navigate the changes to come. And I am so grateful for Danielle. I love you, my friend. Life carried on, and days, weeks, and years seemed to fly by. My husband was involved in church, but it seemed like he was distant from a religious point of view. He was a great husband and father, but never quite lived up to my expectation of the spiritual leader, what that spiritual leader should look like in our home. I always thought this was because of the way he grew up, that my family was just, more conservative and a little bit more strict or rigid. I felt like spiritual things fell on me to initiate, like family worship, enrolling the kids in Pathfinders and other church activities and getting them there. And sometimes I felt angry that he didn't seem to care more about these things. I was tired and I was exhausted, and I kept trying to do the right thing. I felt, though, like something was missing. I felt like I wanted to study the Bible, but I wasn't really sure where to start. I would try to read it, but it didn't make sense. I talked to my friend Danielle about this, and she seemed to have the same desire, and we thought, well, let's try and start something. So we talked to another friend, but it just never seemed to happen. We were all too busy. In the meantime, some of the other parents who were involved with the children's program also expressed a desire to meet and to study. While this was happening, my husband got a call, interestingly enough, from a friend that he was in a men's Bible study group with, and that friend had left Adventism. And he told Michael that he was going to have a Bible study and asked him if he wanted to come. And of course, Michael said yes. I was ecstatic. I thought this was wonderful. I was so happy because I thought this was wonderful. He would be able to study. He would, maybe his leadership role spiritually would grow in our family. And he could also pass on those wonderful things that he would learn to all of us. Interestingly enough, they were studying the book of Galatians. And for any one of you who have never read it, I challenge you to read it because it is truly an amazing book and an awesome place to start. A few months later, the parents group at church got going, and we would meet once or twice a month. We would make it a potluck. The kids would play, and then we would study or we would talk. We ended up using a book as our guide to discuss Jesus and parenting issues. Michael came to our first meeting. He sat off to the side. He didn't really join the group. For anyone who knows him, they'll know that he's a great guy. He's social, he's funny, he's smart, but he can be a little bit intimidating and unapproachable when he wants to be, and that was definitely the vibe that he was giving off during this time. It was very uncomfortable. I don't think he ever came back to one of those groups, although he knew he could, and I invited him if he wanted to come. But I wanted the kids to have connections. I wanted them to have strong friendships, and I felt that I was doing the right thing, and so I kept on going with the kids. I'm sure that some people must have thought that our marriage was in trouble, but like I said, I thought I was doing the right thing, and I wanted them to feel like they were a part of a group, and I wanted to be part of a group too. I really wanted to study and understand the Bible, not just go with what I'd been taught. I wanted to be able to ask questions. I wanted to know where to start, but I wasn't sure. The interesting thing is that we weren't even using the Bible during this study. We just had some book that we would photocopy and read and talk about. That seems to be the pattern I noticed with me later on looking back. I always looked for a book to explain the Bible instead of actually looking to the Bible itself and reading it. Michael came to church with us less and less, and this really distressed me. He would come if he had a duty to perform. He often said that Sabbath was work for him, and he didn't really enjoy it. I kept trying to figure out what I could do to change things or how I could make things better, and sometimes I would actually ask people to ask him to do things just so that he would come to church with us, so it would keep up appearances. I didn't want anyone thinking that things were wrong, and I dreaded when people would ask me where he was, and I would make excuses for him. It was hard, and I was tired of always being on my guard. I often would sit in church feeling like my heart was breaking, and I wondered, can anyone see it? I never thought we wouldn't be in church as a family, and it broke my heart. Growing up, my family, we did everything together. My dad used to say, a family that prays together stays together. What did I do wrong? Like, how did I fail? Why weren't we all together? I became pretty depressed. I would cry at the drop of the hat. Worse than this. Sometimes, because of the stress, I would lose my voice, which was probably a blessing. I tried going to conferences and reading books about happiness and how to find your joy, but I still felt like my world was falling apart. And one night, in my despair, I cried out to God, and He answered me. He said, "Trust me." The words just popped into my head like a text message. It was the most amazing thing. I knew it was Him. And I remember thinking, okay, God, okay. For the first time in a while, I felt some peace. During this time, there was a lot of turmoil. My cousin, who was like an older brother to me, had left Adventism. This affected me deeply. My husband was now questioning. I couldn't tell my family what was happening. I couldn't confide in anyone at church because I didn't want them to judge me. I had heard the comments that they would make about other people who had left, and I didn't want to be the topic of those comments. I heard the way my family criticized my cousin for leaving, and I couldn't bear that. So I turned inward. I had to deal with it myself. I felt the distance growing between me and all the people around me. My heart was so heavy, and I was exhausted. I was stressed with work and home, and I prayed that God would just make everything stop for a while. God answered my prayer. He did, in the most unexpected way, because we were on a family vacation, and you know what? I fell. And I tore my Achilles tendon, and I had to have surgery. Couldn't go anywhere. My family loves to travel. And with me being out of commission and healing after surgery, I encouraged Michael to take our oldest son on a mission trip to India. I thought it would be a good experience. And the youth pastor, who was a friend of my husband's, was going, and I secretly hoped that he'd be able to talk with Michael and set him straight. Imagine my surprise when Michael came home and shared with me that he had had time to talk to the pastor on the long bus rides that they had, and that the pastor agreed with him. I was shocked, disappointed and angry to say the least, because he was supposed to fix this for me. How could this happen? I had married an Adventist so that I wouldn't have to go through this. Anyway, I later learned that God draws us to Him, and it's not about anything that we do. When Michael didn't come to church, he would stay home. He would watch videos. His friend had told him about some group of former Adventists in Redlands, Loma Linda. And Michael found them online, and he started listening to the sermons. Then I saw books start to arrive at home. Cultic Doctrine, which I didn't like the title of, and Whitewashed. That one didn't bother me so much, but the Cultic Doctrine title really, I was not happy. He finally told me that he couldn't attend church anymore, and that he was going to resign his duties. I was really upset by this. I was devastated, but I tried not to show it. I think deep down I knew it was coming. He later said that it was one of the hardest things that he had ever had to do, and he didn't know if our marriage would survive this. Even after he told me this, I would still get up every Saturday and take the kids to church. Now more than ever, I felt that I had to set a good example and be a good model for them. I was exhausted. I was exhausted physically and mentally and spiritually, but I just kept on going because my children's spiritual lives was at stake, and now it was up to me. Growing up, my dad had talked often about his sister who had married an unbeliever and stressed how important it was to marry someone who believed as we did. But now, you know what? I took strength from her story, knowing that she had raised 3 good Adventist men who were all in the church. And now I prayed that I would be able to raise spiritually strong children without Michael. She was able to stay married, so there must have been a way. There must be a way that 2 spouses who don't believe the same can still work together. I remember thinking that divorce was just not an option for me. I loved my husband, and I couldn't picture my life without him. I wasn't happy with him right now, but I didn't want to be without him. I had to find a way. I had to find a way to keep my marriage together and make everything work. Michael continued to study. I felt angry and alone. It became difficult. It became difficult to do spiritual activities at home with the kids. Things like worship were so hard. He would always contradict something I said or take issue with something I said or was reading. And so I thought, well, what can I do? Well, maybe if I don't use Adventist materials, it'll be better. So I went and bought a whole bunch of Christian devotionals and I used them instead. But if he wasn't criticizing the things we were talking about, then he would come and he would fall asleep. And that irritated me even more because he was not setting a good example for the kids. Pretty much everything he did at this point was ticking me off. I was just not happy and not always happy to be around, I have to admit. But something really interesting happened one night at worship, something that really impacted me, impacted all of us, I think. We were talking about something or reading a story. I don't even remember what it was about. And Michael took issue with something that was said. And then he said, Adam was with Eve in the garden when she ate the fruit. Well, that's not what we learned. I had to correct this misinformation. That's not right. So I explained that Eve had wandered away from Adam, and that's when she was tempted. And if she had just stayed with him, none of this would have happened. So of course, that's what I told Michael and the kids, and he encouraged us to look it up. So of course, I confidently took my Bible, and we looked up the text. So my Bible said in Genesis 3:6, she took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Wait a second. Surely this couldn't be right. I read it again. It said with. I thought to myself, it must be the translation. This can't be right. So I challenged the kids to go around the house and find every Bible in every translation we had and bring it back because we needed to see if all the Bibles said the same thing. And sure enough, we read it in every translation we had. And Adam was with Eve. How could this be? This actually really shook me to the core. I know it's a small thing, but if I had that wrong, what else did I have wrong? After all, little white lies are still lies, right? From the beginning, I tried really hard not to be combative. I'm not really a confrontational person anyway, for anyone who knows me. But I tried to get the kids to see things from both perspectives and figure out what they believed. So I figured with time, Michael would get his act together. And so when he took issue with things, I would say, okay, this is what your dad believes. And I would try and present what I had learned. And I would encourage them to look for answers and not just take what Michael and I said to be truth. Growing up, I remember that asking questions was actually a bad thing. Whether or not it was intended to be that way or not, I don't know. But that was the message I got. Because if you questioned, it was interpreted as doubt, and you would lose your soul over it. People have asked me now how Michael changed during this time. And I had to really think about this for a while. But I think he appeared more calm and content and confident in what he believed. He was studying, he was growing in his understanding. I could see that. He was developing a relationship with Jesus, and I wanted that for him. He was able to say that he was saved, and I wanted that too. We had always been taught that Ellen White said you should never do that you were not to say that you were saved. That was a bad thing to do. We didn't really argue about things, but we did talk about things, and it didn't always end well. I would typically shut down, especially when I realized I wasn't getting anywhere or I wasn't winning. I would talk about the importance of Sabbath and keeping it. And he would say things like, it's not about a day, or every day is rest in Jesus, whatever that meant. I would talk about diet, and he would say things like, it's not a salvation issue, or Jesus made everything clean for food. The phrase that he used most often with me, which irritated me so much, and I still have a physical reaction when he says it, I have to admit, although I wouldn't tell him that, it was the phrase, it's not about you. And I later realized that, because I didn't always know what he meant when he said that, but I later realized that it truly is not about what we do. Salvation, it's a gift, and it's not because we earn it. It's not because we deserve it. It's not because we're worthy. In Adventism, it was always salvation, but you had to do something else. And he would always come back at me, it's not about you. He still says it sometimes, and I still feel the hairs on the back of my neck, because it really got to me. Anyway, I was frustrated because I would leave for church and Michael would be lying on the couch watching videos, and I would come home and he would still be in the same position. It was in a conversation with him, I actually told him, I think it was in an effort to get him to find some place to go, to find a group of people to worship with or something. I don't know. But I told him, I said, I'm not going to take the kids out of an Adventist church just for them to not be connected somewhere spiritually. This seemed to prompt him anyway, and he started exploring Sunday churches in our area. He was excited about going, and he shared his impressions with me. He attended Harvest, and he was amazed by the sheer number of people that were there, how everyone would sing, and how he could hear the pages of the Bibles turning in church. One of the churches he decided to check out was the one where the former Adventists were. I was not happy when he told me, but I didn't say anything. At least he wasn't on the couch. I was not happy because I thought, they might lead him further astray, and I still had hope that maybe he would get it together and come back. Michael went to the FAF conference, which was happening right around that time, and it was really fun. It's funny now to talk to people and hear their initial impressions of him at that conference. He met a lot of wonderful people that have played a really important role in supporting us, supporting our family. And I especially want to thank Woody and Cheryl for sitting with him at that conference and talking to him. That really was so special and impacting for him. Thank you. Michael began attending Redeemer Fellowship after that. And he started inviting the kids to attend with him, bribing them with the promise of donuts that were served after the service. Michael invited me to go too. There was a conference talk on cults, and I had always found cults very interesting. Listening to talks on the Illuminati and the Masons and all that kind of thing, I found fascinating, so I agreed to go. And Paul Carton spoke, and he spoke about Ellen White. Well, I have to tell you, I didn't see that coming. I thought he would talk about Mormons or maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, but I didn't think he was going to talk about Adventists in that light. Because in my mind, Adventism wasn't a cult. We could leave any time we wanted. But I've come to learn that even though we leave physically, mentally is where that struggle is. Then at the conference, someone got up and gave her testimony, and she was crying. She told her story, but all I heard was her bashing Adventism. It was very uncomfortable. And then they had a question and answer period. I have to say this part was a little bit impressive because people were quoting Ellen White, pages, and what she said. It was actually pretty impressive, especially from an Adventist who had never really read her books. Even though I had tried, they had read her stuff and they knew it. I guess I really didn't think that Ellen White was that important and that I could be an Adventist without her. But I've come to realize just how that is not possible. Her ideology is infused into Adventist beliefs. Unless you study the truth, you're not going to see the counterfeit. You will be fooled. I encourage you to study. Don't be fooled. Somewhere in here, I don't know if it was before or after, the timeline, I have to admit, has become fuzzy. But we went to Canada to see friends and family. We stayed with one of my husband's best friends. He was actually a trained Adventist pastor who had left the ministry and the church. And Michael and this gentleman share books, and they would talk about them. And while we were up there, we were sitting around chatting one evening, and I told him that I wasn't happy that Michael had left. And we had a discussion on how to study the Bible, because that's something I really wanted to do. I wanted to know the truth. I had always been told I had the truth as an Adventist, but now I didn't know how to defend it. I knew the stories that were in the Bible, but I just didn't know enough. I had to study. I had to study to defend myself and my beliefs and to teach my kids what was true. I believed the Bible. I just didn't really know how to study it. I wanted to see the whole picture, not just a collection of stories. So, of course, when I got back home, I, of course, ran out and bought a book on how to study the Bible. I did read it. I don't know if I ever put it into practice, but anyway, during our conversation, this gentleman asked me if I had read Whitewashed. I knew Michael had read it. I had seen it at home. We had talked about it briefly. I hadn't really read Ellen White's stuff, but I still felt like I had to defend her in some way. And I had told Michael when he read the book that he should keep an open mind and maybe read the rebuttal, because the Adventists had a book, I think it was by Judd Lake, Ellen White Under Fire. So I told Michael, well, read that book and compare, see what they have to say, see what you think. He told me it was nonsense, but anyway, Michael's friend asked me if I had read this book, Whitewashed, and I said no. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said to me, "What are you afraid of?" And I didn't know what to say. So of course I didn't say anything. His friend has always been like that, very straightforward, no beating around the bush. He says what he thinks. Somehow it stuck with me when he said that. And I thought, well, what am I afraid of? So I kind of took it as a challenge. And that summer as we were driving, I did read the book. I had always learned growing up that the test of a true prophet was, if they speak not according to my word, then the truth is not in them. And after I read that book, all I can say is that she just didn't measure up. I didn't know how often she got it wrong. And the more I read, the more I realized that she couldn't be a prophet. She was just wrong too many times. Michael continued to attend Redeemer and would tell me that the ladies were praying for me. I was skeptical, and I figured that that's just the sort of thing you say that someone says, I didn't really think about it, but later, when I met them, I came to understand that that's exactly what these ladies do. And I'm really grateful for that. Michael asked me a few times if I would come to church with him, but I felt like it was wrong. How could I go to church on Sunday when Saturday was the right day? I finally broke down and I confided in a friend at church. And she asked me 2 questions. She said, "Does Michael love the Lord?" And I said, "Yeah, he does." And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, why can't you go with him?" And again, I didn't know what to say. But her question stuck with me. And when he asked me to come to church with him again at the 1-year anniversary, I thought, okay, let's give it a shot. Because it seemed to mean a lot to him, and I did want to support him. So we went. And surprisingly, I was okay. It didn't feel wrong. He kept looking at me and asking me, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I mean, I was nervous because I didn't know anybody, but it was okay. And it was nice to meet some of those ladies afterwards who he had told me were praying for me and for our family. So once I realized that it was okay to go to another church, I figured I could do both. I could support Michael by attending church with him on Sundays, and I could still take the kids to the Adventist church, which I still thought was the right thing to do. It was tiring. Not a lot was getting done at home, but I actually enjoyed going to church with him more than going to my own church. The sermons I thought were fascinating. I had never heard pastors read and discuss verses in context and preach through books of the Bible. I felt like I was finally learning something, like I was finally starting to study a little bit and understand. While attending, I noticed in the bulletin that they were starting a women's Bible study on the book of Hebrews in September. And I wanted to be a part of a women's Bible study group. I had never had this opportunity because of work, and all of my efforts to join something or start something had never been successful. So I thought maybe God's opening the door for me to do this. Maybe He's giving me this gift now. But I didn't know how I would get there. I didn't know where it was. And I was always a little timid. I wasn't one to really, go out on a limb. So I thought, well, how can I make this work? I noticed that FAF also had a study there at the same place on Friday night. And I thought, maybe I can get Michael to take me there, and then I'll know where the women's Bible study is, and then I can go to that. So one Friday night in August, Michael had already gone back to work, and he came home tired. But I was on a mission. And I asked him repeatedly, more like nagged him, are we going to Bible study tonight? Are we going to FAF tonight? Are we going? And he just sat there in the chair. And I kept bugging him. And finally, we all piled in the car and we went to study Friday night. That was definitely a highlight for me, because I'll never forget the look on Colleen's face when I walked in. It was amazing. And I was nervous, but I was so excited because we were finally going to study the Bible, and I would know where the women's Bible study was going to be. The study was so interesting, and that was the start of us making Friday night study part of our routine for years to come. I wanted to study. I was seeking the truth. And they had a way of understanding my questions, of talking about the verses, of helping me understand it. Because when I tried to read the Bible on my own, I honestly felt sometimes like I wasn't smart enough. I just didn't get it. But my plan worked. I did get to study the Bible, and I did get to join the women's Bible study group on Tuesday nights. While I was conflicted because I was studying the Bible with formers, they were answering my questions. And one night I remember Colleen looked at me and she asked me, she's like, what do you want to know? What do you want to study? What's the question that you want answered? And without thinking, it was about the Sabbath. I had to figure out the Sabbath. I had to know what the Bible said, and was that truly the right day? Michael would make comments. It's not about a day, or that every day is rest in Jesus. I didn't understand what he meant by that. We started by studying the covenants: conditional, unconditional, Abrahamic, Davidic, Mosaic. It was fascinating, but I have to admit, by the end of it, the Sabbath wasn't even a question anymore. I was surprised, actually, about how easy it was for me to let go of it and understand that it really wasn't a salvation issue for me. It wasn't about what I did. It wasn't about a day. I felt such relief because for years I had felt like we weren't keeping it right, and I no longer had that guilt. It was amazing as we studied that I started to feel lighter. It was like a light had been turned on in the darkness, and a veil had been lifted from my eyes. In 2 Corinthians 3, it states that whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their heart. But as a person turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. And that's where the Spirit of the Lord is, and there's liberty. That's exactly how I felt. I read things that I didn't even know were in the Bible. The pieces fit together. It was amazing. The Old Testament supported the New Testament. It wasn't one or the other. It wasn't just a bunch of isolated stories put together. We read passages in context, and I learned that context matters and that the words say what they mean. The Bible doesn't contradict itself, and if it does, then there's something wrong. Another time when we were studying, I remember Richard reading a text in Matthew, and it talked about how my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And then he said that the yoke was kind of likened to the law. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I remember thinking, it shouldn't be this hard to follow you, Lord. It shouldn't be this hard. God gave me the most incredible supports during this time, both at Redeemer and in the Adventist Church. And just so you know, I'm sure I'm going to cry here again. But at Redeemer, the women were so welcoming and so kind. I was so touched and amazed at how they were able to be so real with each other. They spoke to each other about their hurts, their pain, their concerns, their families, without any judgment. And they genuinely prayed for each other. And when they said, "I'm praying for you," you knew that it was true. They encouraged my kids, especially my daughter, to come with her questions, and she had her little notebook. And they would ask her if she had questions, and then they would take the time to answer every one of them. I'm so grateful for that. I truly would not be where I am today without the mentorship of those amazing ladies, Colleen, Nikki, Amy, Cheryl, Elizabeth, and many more. Thank you so much. My friend Danielle, who I'm also thankful for, would listen to me and talk to me about all the things that I was learning. The light had been turned on, and I was excited about some of the things that I was learning. Sometimes I was conflicted and trying to make sense of it all. Somehow, she would listen to me, and she made sense of what I was saying. She asked questions. Sometimes she would even get this funny look on her face, and then she would look at me and say, "You didn't know that?" She hadn't always been Adventist, and so some of that she knew from her time before. But I would go on to explain what we believed. And she was surprised by some of the teachings of the church that she didn't know. Sometime during this process, I also gave her a copy of Whitewashed. And I asked her to read it and let me know what she thought. I valued her opinion. And I needed to know if she saw a problem too, or if I was just being gullible and led astray. I began reading books and materials. In December, while traveling, I would stay up late reading at night and text questions to Colleen and Nikki, thankful for the time difference. They would always answer me no matter what time. With them, I knew that I could ask anything, and they would understand, and they would always reply thoughtfully. I didn't always fully understand their responses, but it would spark more questions. I know the Holy Spirit was working on my heart. They were so wonderful, and I can't thank them enough for their support. I truly wouldn't be where I am now without them. It was in December of 2016 at 2:00 in the morning in a hotel room in Florida that I put my head in my hands and I cried, and I told the Lord that it was up to Him. I was giving everything to Him, my life, my marriage, my family, everything. Wherever He took me, I would go. Danielle and I continued to talk on Sabbath. Sometimes we didn't even make it into church. I think there was part of me that didn't want to. One day, she called me up and asked if she could come over. She wanted to talk to Michael and I. It was a bit odd, but it was always great to see them, and so of course they came over. Danielle and her husband Paul came over, and they told us that they had talked, and they had decided to leave the church. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was shocked. I was happy, but then my happiness turned to fear. All these thoughts went through my head. What if this was my fault? What if I'm wrong? What if I led them astray? What if I never see her again if she leaves? I was scared, but I tried not to show it. Interestingly enough, around this time I had decided to leave myself, but I hadn't shared it with anyone yet. I figured that I would just slip away quietly. No one would miss me. They would just think I'd gone to another church. I didn't feel like anyone really cared or would miss me, and no one had reached out to Michael when he left, so it was doable. I decided that I would finish out my duties in children's ministries, but Danielle said she thought, we should probably talk to our children's ministries leader and let her know that we were leaving. And so with Danielle's guidance, I tagged along, and I ended up sharing that I was leaving after she told our friend. Otherwise, I would have just ridden off into the sunset. I found as I studied and embraced my newfound freedom that I was distancing myself from my family, especially my parents and my brothers, which was hard because we'd always been very close. While I was excited, I didn't know how I was going to tell my parents that I had left Adventism. But if I didn't see them, I didn't have to tell them. And we talked a lot about this. I would talk with Colleen about it a lot, and we would pray. And finally, I got up the courage to tell one of my brothers, and it went really well. He asked me if I loved the Lord, and I said yes, and I was a good person, and so we're good. It gave me courage, though, that maybe I could actually tell my parents. And so, as a family, we decided to tell my family, my mom and my dad. It was interesting at the time. I feel like my father took it better than my mother. But in the months to come, I would see that actually the reverse was true. My father put a lot of pressure on me. He would preach to me. He pushed hard for me to return to Adventism. He would look for opportunities to speak with the kids alone. He would tell me that he was concerned for my kids' salvation and the choices that I was making. The pressure was pretty intense, to put it mildly. I can honestly say that it was not an easy time. The pressure from my dad, and then my mom was diagnosed with cancer around that time. It was hard. I felt like my world was falling apart once again. But at least this time I knew that God truly was in control, and that whatever happened was for His glory. I had the peace of knowing that I was saved. And even when times were hard looking back, I don't think I would have traded it for anything. I was pretty content with my newfound relationship with Jesus, and I don't regret that for a moment. As we studied as a family, it generated amazing discussions around our dinner table. I just can't even tell you how wonderful those times have been. We spoke openly about things that we were learning. We asked questions. We used the Bible as our guide. It was amazing to see the kids thinking and growing and understanding the scripture and building their own relationship with the Lord. One of the concerns that I had when we left is I wondered if my kids would be baptized. In Adventism, if kids weren't baptized by the time they were teenagers, often they weren't. And so that was something that was on my heart, and I prayed about that. I prayed for my oldest son. Specifically, he was the one who saw the struggles, the spiritual struggles in our house. He was the one who I thought would remember more about being in Adventism than he did. He was the one who always went to church with me when Michael or the other kids didn't, always making sure that I was okay. I was never happier or more proud when he made his decision to be baptized in 2020. From him, I have learned so much about making habits and finding ways to put God and His Word into our daily lives. And so I thank you, Austin, and I love you. The Lord knew me from before I was born. He had a plan for me, and He drew me to Him, for which I am so thankful. He called me out of darkness into light, and He removed the veil from my eyes and gave me a new heart. I'm so grateful for the gift of His Son. I'm not worthy, and it's not because of anything that I've done, because it's not about me. All glory to God for the great things that He has done.